Okay, so this picture here shows you that the blood is coming from the inferior vena cava below the diaphragm, the superior vena cava above the diaphragm, and also from the coronary sinus that you don't really see, a little bit there. Okay, so the blood is coming in, it's deoxygenated, so it's blue. It is going into a receiving chamber, which is the right atrium. Once the tricuspid valve opens, you can see the blood going from the atria into the ventricle. And then as the heart contracts, what's going to happen is you're going to squeeze the ventricles, and on the right side, the blood is going to be pushed into the pulmonary trunk, and then from the pulmonary trunk will go into the left and right pulmonary arteries, which will bring it to the lungs. In the lungs, I'll talk about Ben. He's going to pick up his oxygen. So once Ben has picked up his oxygen, he is now going to go back. So from here, he's left the lungs, and through the superior and inferior pulmonary veins on both the right and the left side, he is now in the left atrium. Once the left atrium gets full of blood, it's going to drip into the left ventricle. Once the left ventricle is going to get full of blood, it's going to squeeze, kind of like it happened on the same side, on the other side, the right side. And in this particular case, as it squeezes, it's going to close the mitral or bicuspid valve, and at the same time, it's going to open up the aortic valve. Then it's going to send its blood through that valve into the ascending aorta, and then into the aorta, and then the branches will go to the brain and all places above the diaphragm and all places below the diaphragm. So here is all of them side by side. Once again, and I'll repeat this many times, and you'll probably go over it many times too, Ben has to go, once he's dropped off his oxygen anywhere, he's got to get back to the right side of the heart. So the sequence happens very frequently, every time as a matter of fact. So Ben has to get into the right atrium, he has to go through the tricuspid valve, he has to go into the right ventricle, he has to make it through the pulmonary valve, into the pulmonary trunk, into the pulmonary arteries, into a lung on either side, pick up oxygen, and then come back to the left side of the heart through the pulmonary veins, into the left atrium, through the bicuspid valve, and then into the left ventricle, and then from the left ventricle, it is going to be going through the aortic valve into the ascending aorta, and then throughout the whole body. So here's something to think about. Equal volumes of blood are pumped to both the pulmonary and the systemic circuits at the same time. The pulmonary circuit is short. It doesn't have far to go. It goes from the heart to either the right or the left lung. It's also low pressure. Whereas the systemic circuit is going to be very long. Think about leaving your heart and going down to your little toe. And it's because of that distance, it's going to be a high friction circulation. Because of that, that is why the ventricles are different. So with the next picture, here is the left ventricle, and look how thick the walls are there as compared to the wall of the right ventricle. The book says it's 3 times as thick, and that kind of makes sense if you got the same contraction occurring. As it goes squish from the right side, it's only got to go to the lungs, and that same squish has to make it from the left ventricle up and over and around and all the way down to my little toe. That's why I decided to name one of the red blood cells, and now you can follow Ben going from the left ventricle through a one-way valve into an ascending aorta, and then around and then down to his little toe. The third circuit that we haven't mentioned, but we have alluded to it because of it's going to be the third way that's going to bring blood to the right atrium. It's called a coronary circuit. It is the functional blood to the heart muscle itself. It is the shortest circuit because it's only going to go to the heart muscle when the heart is relaxed, and that's called diastole. So the left ventricle receives most of the coronary blood supply because it's got to do most of the work. So if we want to talk about Ben one more time, Ben dumped off oxygen at my little toe. He's now got to make it all the way back to the right atrium, through the tricuspid valve, into the right ventricle, through the pulmonary valve, into the pulmonary trunk, into the pulmonary arteries, into one lung or the other, picking up oxygen. He then has to go into or back to the heart through the pulmonary veins, into the left atrium, through the bicuspid valve, into the left ventricle, and then he has to go through the aortic valve. Then, depending on where Ben is going to go, he might have to go back to that heart again. And so the coronary arteries are the two that are going to be the first two branches off of these. Just stop it for a second.